Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Society of the Eternal Mile podcast. I'm your host, Noah Sias. On this week's episode, we're joined by guitarist Brian Moore from Chicago, Illinois. You may know of his work from the Browning and Indiana-based hardcore band the Cambian, but those are just two bands of many from Brian's resume. Make sure you're following the show on all social media at SOTEM Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the show on whatever platform you listen on. Don't forget about Patreon at patreon.com/SOTEM Podcast. And lastly, if you enjoyed the show, consider leaving a review on whatever platform you listen on. Reviews help the show climb the ranks, so to speak, so if you have a spare minute, feel free to leave one. And speaking of climbing the ranks, I'm very pleased to announce that as of this past weekend, the show has passed the 500 mark for total downloads. Thank you very much to everyone who has been following along so far and those who are new coming in. This podcast has been a word-of-mouth kind of show, so to hit that kind of number from that really means a lot. So again, thank you very much. My first interaction with Brian, as a lot of guests have been so far, was in the summer of 2015 on the Vertebroken run. We had just finished part 1, and we were on our way to start part 2. The first stop for part 2 was at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis, Indiana. Brian was playing with the Cambian at the time. Not much for interaction aside from, hey, great set. Fast forward to March 2016 on the second date of the Macho Man tour, and we were in Joliet, Illinois at Bada Brews. It was one of those million-band festival shows with 2 stages that are always miserable for headlining bands, which we happened to be. The Cambian was playing the second stage, and I sat in for their set. Business as usual. Hey, great set. Great seeing you guys again. It wouldn't be until the summer of 2016 that I would actually have the chance to properly meet Brian. Bermuda received an offer to be direct support to the Browning for a 2-week run in June. This was my first time being on a tour with a band that was noticeably larger than us, so naturally I was a little unsure of how things would be as far as tour package chemistry was concerned. To my relief, Brian was the same guy on day 1 as he was on the last day of tour. Humble, friendly, and welcoming. We talked about rigs, mutual friends in the industry, and a lot more. We also had a FaceTime session post-tour to dial in some tones when he got his Pod HD, and sure enough, same guy is on tour. We haven't shared the stage since then, but we keep fairly regular tabs on each other through social media. As mentioned before, the Browning and the Cambian are just 2 pieces of the story for Brian. He's also served as staff for several bands and has had a brief stay in a few others. So here's my conversation with Brian Moore. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to talk to you.
So where to begin? You have quite the resume. Let's start early. When did you first get involved with music?
It's really weird because when I was younger, I was never like super about about any sort of music. My family was really involved with like theater and plays, so I listened to a lot of like soundtracks to those. And then my oldest brother got a guitar for his birthday or something, and it took me a while to kind of want to play it, but I just started like picking up his guitar and just playing nonsense, like any sort of strings or notes. And then I had a cousin who was very into like Rammstein and Korn and stuff like that, and he sort of got me hooked on the idea of like playing an instrument. So that was sort of the segue into music, I guess.
How about early influences?
I really I loved like 3 Days Grace and like System of a Down and like anyone who's in like Drop C that I could just like get behind. And then stuff that my mom listened to. Like my mom loved like Simon and Garfunkel, especially in like the Moody Blues and stuff like that. So both of those worlds, I know they're very different, but
it all adds up though.
It all comes into play. But yeah, I don't know. It's just like I loved like the sound of the electric guitar.
So let's talk about your first band, Middle Class Militia. How did that get started? And where'd the name come from?
So it was me and like a longtime friend of mine. And we were in high school, and there was this place that's like right up the street from me. It was called the Music Station, and they did like an open mic night where bands could come and play like 2 or 3 songs or whatever. And like we decided that we wanted to do one of those. Speaking of 3 Days Grace and System of a Down, the first 2 songs that we ever played, and this was just guitar. Like there was no drums or anything. It was just 2 of us playing guitar, which is absolutely ridiculous. But and we played Animal I've Become by 3 Days Grace and Chop Suey by System of a Down. And I'm sure it was horrible. I don't have any footage of it, but I know it could not have been good because I'm pretty sure I was singing, which is not. But yeah, we did that, and I got the name from I was in history class, and they were talking about like militias, and the word middle class came up, and so I just sort of put them together, and I was like, that's a pretty cool name. And we wrote it for way longer than we should have. Like even once we were kind of a serious band, we definitely should have changed our name. But
so when did things start to get like more serious?
Well, originally it was just me and my friend, and then we got a drummer at some point. His name is Mark, and I haven't talked to him in a while, but he's one of the most creative people that I've ever met in my life. But so we got a drummer, and then we got like an actual singer, and we started writing like original music, and we were still terrible at this point, mind you, but like I was convinced that, you know, I was bound for superstardom at that point, selling tickets for bands that no one had ever heard of. And like we did a giant scam essentially where you sell as many tickets as you can, and you get to play a venue called the Congress Theater in Chicago. It's like this huge place. But the thing is it's all local bands. There's no national band on it to like draw anybody. So it's so stupid. But we played that, and I think we had like 4 or 5 songs that we never ended up like recording or anything. But I still keep in touch with that singer today because he's super talented. He plays in a band called City Mouth out of Illinois, and he's super talented. But we did that for however long, like probably over a year, I would imagine. We were playing shows like every weekend with that our parents had to drive us to because we were all 14 years old. And then eventually the singer decided that he didn't really want to do like metal because it didn't make sense for his voice, and he was, you know, pushing his voice all the time because he had to be louder than our horrible amplifiers. And so he left, and we went from being like, I would say like a Day to Remember style like metalcore band with choruses and stuff like that to like a super heavy like deathcore band, and we got a vocalist instead of a singer. I don't know, I like stopped tuning to drop C and started tuning to drop A on a guitar that definitely should not have been in drop A. Yeah, and then that was the first time that we ever recorded anything. We put out like a 4-song EP that I hope you can't find anywhere. I don't think you can, but I really hope you can't.
So when did that ultimately come to an end?
Well, it went for a while, like, cause we had the one vocalist for a while, and then he was just super unreliable. Like anytime we'd book a show, it would be like day of, and he'd be like, I can't do it, or like, you know, my mom, like, he had a thing, once we all started driving, like, shows obviously got easier to do because we could go places, but his mother wouldn't let him drive on the highway, like on the interstate, so he still couldn't go anywhere. Like, over 15 minutes away from his house without getting a ride. And so ultimately it came down to we didn't want him in the band anymore, and we had a better vocalist lined up, and so we got him, and there is an EP out there on the internet that you can find with this singer, which I went and listened to it not that long ago, and I'm still pretty proud of the songs that we wrote for how stupid we were. And I don't even know how long he was in the band. It was definitely over a year, but and he was the one that kind of taught me about, like, you know, I bought a tube amp, and I like learning about staying in real tune. So he was the one that pushed me to become like a better musician, like a better performer and stuff like that. And as far as I can remember it, like, you know, we just started to argue and stuff, and there was never like a breakup, but it just sort of fizzled out. Like, there was no reason for us to continue because no one seemed super into it anymore. But yeah, I think it was like, trying to think of when I graduated. I graduated high school in 2011, and so it would have been 2012 or 13, I think, that sort of like came to an end, because I know I was in college at the time. So
not too much longer after that, you'd be approached by the Cambian.
Yeah, it was like, and they're still like some of my like best friends to this day. But I had played shows with their old band like a ton. And so we were all friends, and we were in like the same scene and everything. And they started the band with this like group of kids from our area was like notorious for just like starting bands and then leaving them. So that happened again, and they were looking for another guitar player. And so they hit me up, and at first I was like kind of hesitant, because like everyone in our music scene, like, I was very easy to make fun of, and I probably deserved most of it, to be fair. But I was like, you guys have something cool, and I don't want to like tarnish that. But I ended up doing it, and because I know when I joined the band, I like had the only 7-string that I had was like an Ibanez, like the 7321, the $300 one. And like playing with them really taught me about being like a tight musician, and like, you know, playing to a click and everything like that, and tone and stuff like that. But they hit me up, and we did like 2 shows, and then the very last member of that, like the group of people who is notorious for leaving bands, left. And we got our singer Tyler, who's still in it to this day. And yeah, no, I've definitely had some of like the greatest times of my life playing to 15 people in that band. So still a great band. That's like, and I play with them from time to time when I'm home now. Like, I'll probably play like 2 to 3 shows a year with them still, because it's just fun, like, to get away from the kind of industry of, you know, like a touring musician and stuff like that, and just play a show for the hell of it.
Sure, kind of getting back to your roots.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you had a brief stay in Enterprise Earth.
Yeah, I was still remember because I was at a Cambian show in like the middle of nowhere, Indiana, and I got a text from a friend of mine who was like, he was in the band Demolisher and then ended up in Enterprise Earth. And they were looking for a bass player. And he knew that he loved, you know, working with me and that I was a good guy or whatever. So he asked if I would want to do that. And I said yes, thinking pretty much that it was like, it would never materialize. That it would just be like, you know, he'd forget about it in whatever 2 or 3 weeks or something. And then that ended up like being a thing, and I only ever did 1 tour with them, and I was on the first album, Patient Zero. I'm in like 1 music video, but it was a good time. I learned a lot working with them, and it was my first like my first real band that I was ever in, like my first band with a touring schedule and stuff like that. So
shortly after that, you'd find yourself involved with your current band, the Browning. How did that come about?
well, I had worked for the Browning earlier in that year, and I knew towards the end of the Enterprise Earth tour that it wasn't going to be for me. Like I still wish that band nothing but the best, especially Dan and BJ and Yusuf and all them. But I was just like, this isn't my thing, and I went directly from the Enterprise Earth tour that I did to working for the Browning again. And it was on that tour that they kind of realized that they weren't happy with their current bass player. And about midway through the tour, Johnny, our singer, asked me if I would want to do it. To which I said, yes, absolutely. And it just came down to ordering flights for the European tour later in the year, and their bass player at the time did not get a flight, and I did, so that was kind of the defining line. But yeah, I had been a big fan of the Browning for a long time. A friend of mine, well, probably like my best friend, did vocals. He was the vocalist for a band called Serpents from Chicago, and they did a tour with the Browning, and so that's how I ever even knew about the band or anything like that. And Middle Class Militia actually played with the Browning probably like 3 times or something like that, because I always wanted to be at their shows, and I was brought them food and brought them drinks and stuff like that, like just sort of like a care packages. And I became good friends with the members of the band, and they asked me to work for them, to do merch for them once, and then it just kind of evolved into eventually joining the band. But I had been friends with them for years, like probably 2 or 3 years even before I started touring with them. It always seems to work out that way, I think, like kind of someone who's a big fan or a friend and stuff like that.
So you're on one of the Browning's releases, and that would be Isolation, correct?
Yeah, that was our album that we put out last year. On Spine Farm Records.
And what was the response to that release?
Really good. I feel like I was kind of surprised because it had been a very long time since the Browning put out an album. Like there was a 3-year gap since the last album, and we were on a different label and we had different members, and so I didn't know how it was gonna be, but it really seemed like from the start that it kind of stuck, which you never know as a band. You can put out a new album that you're super proud of, and your fans are like, this sucks, don't ever play this stuff. And you're like, okay, I guess we'll go back to playing the old stuff for another 2 years and then try again. But it really seemed like people latched onto the singles almost instantly, and then every song on the record has been like we've played every single song live except one, which I feel like for a metal band these days is pretty hard to do, because most people kind of just want to hear the greatest hits of your past 3 albums. But it honestly, and it was the Browning's highest selling album. Not that really like means much to me or anything, but we were able to do stuff that we'd never done before. Like we pressed vinyl, which for our band is absolutely ridiculous, but it was great. It seemed like kind of every market that we hit, they didn't feel like new songs. They just felt like songs, which is good.
Along with all that we've talked about, you've definitely had your share of work with other bands, including staff positions and actually filling in. Who are some of the people you've worked with?
The first tour that I ever did was with a band called Demolisher, and it was while Adam Warren from Oceano was in the band, and they needed my they needed a van, and I was like, well, you can use my van if I can come with you. So I did that tour, and that was the last 10 Seconds of Life. Legion from Ohio, who are still to this day one of the heaviest bands that I've ever seen live, probably next to you guys. But Legion from Ohio, a band called Death of an Era, and Demolisher, and that was in the spring of 2015 or 2014 rather, and that was how I met anybody that I ended up touring with. Like, that was when it was over. I just told Adam, I was like, hey, if you guys ever need anything, just let me know. And sure enough, early next year, Oceano was looking for a merch guy, and Adam hit me up to do that. So without Adam Warren, I would never have started to do any of what I've done. Because once the Browning found out that I was working with Oceano, they were like, okay, well, he can at least, he can do this. So they hit me up to do merch. And so, like, my first real year of touring, which was 2015, I was gone for like 7 or 8 months because bands just liked working with me, and new bands kept coming up. But I worked for Oceano for a long time, like 2.5 years. I worked for the Browning before I was in the band. I wrestled a bear once, which to this day is the best experience I've ever had working for a band. And then I worked for the last 10 Seconds of Life, and just recently, I literally just got back 2 days ago, but I worked for Cant Hill for about 3 months this year, like 3 months straight. So
Wow.
But yeah, I've definitely seen I've seen both sides of the spectrum, and I've seen almost everything that you egos and just what have you, like anything that you could think of, like playing in bands and working for bands. So
I feel like people definitely underestimate the value of like a quality staff member.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's just like anything else. Like the thing that people don't get is they think that touring, or even like your merch guys, like, well, let's just get our friend to do it because we can pay him nothing. Like he just wants to come tour for a little bit. But like, it's like, I mean, it's real employment. Like, you can pay someone nothing, and they're not going to do a good job, and your numbers aren't going to be right if you keep track of your numbers at all. Like, a good merch guy and a good front of house guy are the two best things you can spend money on as a band, because those are the interactions that people are going to remember. Are like, wow, this band sounded great, and then I went to go buy a shirt, and their merch guy was super helpful and super nice and everything like that.
With any sort of creative operation like this, even what people would consider to be like the lower rung of the ladder, so to speak, is still part of the face of the company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just like Undercover Boss, like everyone's representing you, and you want to make sure that the people who are representing you are giving off a good impression of your business, and not not scoffing at people or being rude or anything like that. Like, there's no such thing as stupid questions, is how I feel about it. And that was even when I worked at a liquor store before I ever started touring, and like, as much as I hated it there, I was, taught very well that how you talk to people and stuff like that means a lot to that person. So if even if they're being rude and annoying, if you can just be pleasant, you're always going to be in the right too.
All right, so let's switch it over to some gear talk. You have some endorsements. Who are you endorsed through?
Right now, I'm with a guitar company called Ormsby Guitars that I could not be any happier with. Like, I've had nightmare artist relations stories for other companies, and even just like clothing companies and stuff. Most of the time, it's super hard to get a hold of people, and they don't have any information for you and all that. But Matt and Perry from Ormsby have been so great to me. And like, we have a giant Facebook group chat of all the endorsed artists. And so if you need something, you literally can just send them a Facebook message and be like, hey, what's going on? And it's not like a super stressful thing to try and get a hold of someone. And they make incredibly unique guitars. They're very visually striking and they sound great. And I've bought and sold a lot of guitars over the year, but I have two of these Ormsbys, and I don't think that I will ever get rid of them, even beyond like when I'm done touring or done being in a band or whatever. I really love these guitars. I've never felt that way about like gear before, because every other piece of gear, you know, I've bought and sold over the time. So, but Ormsby guitars, they're out of Perth, Australia. Literally the best customer service that like I've ever dealt with, and I think anyone's ever dealt with. Like, everyone who gets one talks about how good the buying experience was. For the price point they're hitting, I've had guitars from other companies that would cost me, like retail would cost me the same amount of money as an Ormsby would, and the quality is just so much better. It's insane. But yeah, Ormsby guitars out of Perth, Australia. I'm with a company called Bestronix Pro Audio, which is actually out of Tinley Park, Illinois, which is crazy because it's like 30 minutes from me. But they make all my cables. And Brad from BTPA is another great A&R guy, and he's always been super cool to me. He gave me a tour of their warehouse, which was crazy because I expected it to be like a relatively small operation, but they do fiber optics cables for like the U.S. military there and stuff like that. So it's a huge thing. And so he's the head of the company, and for him to take time out of his day to give me a walkthrough of their factory and stuff like that has been awesome. And like when we had everything happen in Europe and I needed to reorder cables and stuff like that, he was very generous and like gave me a great deal on it. And they do a bunch of like custom colors, and they'll build rigs for you. So if like you're like, hey, we're gonna be on tour at this time and I need a 3 Kemper rig for our entire band in a rack case and like all this stuff, they'll order all of it and put it together for you, and then they ship it to you, or you just come pick it up, so you don't have to do all the dirty work. But they're great, man. I know a lot of people don't think cables are like a huge deal when it comes to music, but I've never had one go out on me, ever. And I have purple ones, which I really appreciate personally. So,
what's your signal chain looking like these days?
So it's super different from the last time that we talked. And I actually haven't had a chance to use this live yet, but I have the Ormsby, and I have a Hype Machine GTR and an Ormsby SX. And so I run the guitar into a Shure GLXD wireless system, which is also a tuner, which I bought that like from Sam Ash, but I can't say enough good things about that wireless system because it's made out of metal. That's my biggest thing about it, is the pack is made out of metal, so it can, you can throw it around and drop it on the ground and it holds up, and it has a rechargeable battery, which for guitar systems is like insane because you're not burning through double A's. But so I go from the Shure GLXD, and then a couple months ago, I just got a Kemper profiling amp. So I have that sitting in front of me right now, and I haven't had a chance to use it like on tour yet, but I am in love with it as far as a rig goes. And then the Kemper profiling amp, I run into an ISP Stealth power amp, which weighs 1.2 pounds. So that's fun. And then I run that into 2 Vader 4x12 cabinets. And that's the whole kit and caboodle.
Any items on the wish list?
So I really want, this isn't anything that I would like probably use, but I really want, Jackson just put out these X series guitars, and they have a Rhodes V with a reverse headstock that's black and pink. and I really, really want one of those. So that's on the list. I want to try out a lot of like smaller companies' guitars and pedals and stuff like that, because I'm just at a point where like I'm sick of paying, you know, like, and this isn't a bash against these companies because they make great guitars, but I'm sick of paying like ESP or Schecter or something to just give me the same guitar 400 times. You know what I mean? So I really want to try guitars from Jericho guitars. I really want to try. There's a guitar that I specifically want to get from Chapman Guitars from the UK. And like, I just want to try stuff that like, you can't get at a Guitar Center. Like, I just want to try different companies that, really like care about, because it means everything to them, because if they don't put out a good product, they're done. It's not like these huge guitar companies where they can put out something someone doesn't like and write it off as a loss. So I really want to try some smaller companies. I really want to get one of the Horizon devices, the precision drives, the Misha Mansour drive. There's a company, I don't know how to pronounce it, so forgive me if I mess it up, but there's a company called like Aris Effects or Arise Effects or something like that. And they put out a ton of just cool like boutique pedals that I probably would never use for my band, but I really just want to have. And then I want to get a 7 or an 8 string again, because I haven't had one since I was like actively in the Cambian, like playing shows every weekend, because the Browning definitely doesn't need anything like that. But I want something that I can do like drop F sharp and drop E in again. So
let's have a discussion about the Eternal Mile. When was your first tour and what was the lineup?
May 2014, and it was Last 10 Seconds of Life, Legion, Death of an Era, and Demolisher.
Would you call that run a good, bad, or neutral experience?
For me, it was like, in hindsight, that tour probably sucked, but for me, it was great because that was all I ever dreamed of doing was, sleeping in Walmart parking lots and just like hanging out with my friends and stuff like that. And that was literally what that was. There weren't a ton of people at the shows every night or anything, but for me, it was great. That was the only tour that I've ever done and then come back to work my regular job at the time. And I was just so bummed. Like, I just wanted to get back out and do it again. So
between touring and local shows, do you have any idea how many shows you've done?
It's gotta be somewhere in the hundreds. Like, I would say probably like, it's super hard to think about, because I've been touring and playing shows for quite a few. I would say it has to be upwards of 500 somewhere, if not more than that. But
favorite markets to play?
The Northeast of the U.S., like New York and Pennsylvania and stuff like that, just because those kids are absolutely crazy. Colorado, the Pacific Northwest in general as well, like Seattle, Washington, and Spokane, Washington, and Denver and Salt Lake. Those kids are also crazy. I love Germany. Anywhere in Germany is great. I've done the two biggest shows that I'll probably ever play in my life were both in Germany. There's very few like bad markets, but I've been to South Dakota and it's not great. So
how about favorite venues?
Oh, favorite the Agora in Cleveland, Ohio is my favorite venue, probably in the United States. Come and Take It Live in Austin, Texas is a great venue. Like, I went to a place on this last tour called the Orange Peel in Asheville, North Carolina. That was a great experience. Where else? The Palladium, Worcester is, historic. That place is fun.
Favorite city to have a day off in?
That's a hard one. Most of the time I would say Chicago because I could go home. But anywhere on the West Coast, because just like the amount of food that I can eat there, and it's just so pretty. Like I love having a day off in Seattle or a day off in Portland, Oregon, or something like that. But it's always nice too if you're in like Florida or something and you can go to a beach and hang out, or even you want to go to an amusement park or something.
What would you consider to be the biggest rookie mistake being on tour?
Doing anything for free. And that's not no one should do it for money, but like going out there and just being like, hey, yeah, I'll do whatever you want for free, just so I can be on tour, like that whole sort of thing. Because that's what I did, and it did work out for me in the long run, but it made it like, I feel like, oh, people don't respect you when you don't respect yourself. And I would say driving too fast with a trailer, because it's very unsafe.
Top 3 must-have tour items.
For me, it's Cliff Bars, for sure. Headphones, because people are going to get on your nerves, and you're going to want to block it out with some sort of music. And Monster energy drinks.
So I know I'm going to be preaching to the choir here, but I found that in my experience on the road, there's a lot of misconceptions and over-glamorizations about what it is that we do. What's been some of the wilder things you've been asked or told about what we do? I'm a very sensitive human being, probably more so than your average like metal musician. And so I've been very vocal about, it's heartbreaking sometimes to be out and realize, that your favorite band is a bunch of dickheads or something like that. So I've posted about that on my social media, and the biggest thing for me is everyone's like, there's people who would kill to be doing what you're doing, so you shouldn't complain about it and blah, blah, blah. And that's true. I shouldn't be complaining about the amazing opportunities that I have, but it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. And a lot of people forget that like life goes on at home while you're out on the road. So like it's hard to, keep any sort of relationship or anything like that, because when you think about like 3 months of not seeing someone, it's very hard to keep any sort of flame alive. Or even like, I don't really have friends here back at home anymore, because there's no way to rejuvenate relationships or anything like that when you're gone for so long. And people can't really relate to like the problems that you have, because if you've never done it, you don't understand necessarily. You don't understand that like you have to keep yourself sane on the road, and trying to also entertain someone at home is next to impossible. So shout out to all of the boyfriends and girlfriends of touring musicians that have had the patience to stick with them through being gone for so long. And the biggest other thing that happened to me was because we got our van broken into in Italy, and we got like all our personal items stolen from us. And like the amount of people that were like, that's your fault, was insane. Like the biggest thing is they're like, why would you leave all your stuff in the van and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, because that's my house. And I was like, if you left your house to go grocery shopping and someone broke in and stole all your stuff, I wouldn't be like, why did you leave that stuff in your house? Like, why didn't you take everything that you owned with you? Like, it's absurd sometimes with the people who, again, like you're saying, they think they understand what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And they try to relate it to, a situation that they've never been in. And you're hitting it right on the head there with, it's your house. What do you expect?
I mean, and I get the idea of like, well, it's happening a lot, so you should be on your toes and stuff like that. But you can't keep someone in the van at all times. Like, you can't designate someone to go out and not have fun, because being on tour sucks enough already to like sit in your van and while your friends go to the mall or something like that. And then another thing that I want to touch on is it's also not as bad as a lot of people make it out to seem. Like, especially Twitter is a place where, and I'm guilty of this as well, people take a lot of their frustrations out of like the road and stuff like that. But some people want to make it seem like it's a burden. And it's like, you can stop doing this whenever you want, you know? Like, you can quit your band and go get a real job if you don't want to do this anymore. And a lot of people just, like, make it out to be, like, this immensely hard thing, which it can be at times, but also at the same time, you have to realize that it's like, you know, we're playing breakdowns for a living. Like, it's crazy that we have this opportunity, and it isn't all sunshine and rainbows, but it's also not quite as difficult as I feel that some people make it out to be. So I don't know if that makes me a hypocrite or what, but like,
I mean, it kind of covers both ends of it, really, because I can totally relate. There's been times where I've been out on the road and I think, who in their right mind like thinks this is cool to do?
Yeah.
You know, this is miserable. And then there's other times where it's like, man, I couldn't imagine being home right now.
Yeah.
You know? So with all that said, let's go over some of the less glamorous moments in your career.
Okay. I have a lot of them, so.
Do you have any major horror stories on stage?
Not really on stage. I'm pretty good about everything on stage. I mean, I've had times where gear doesn't work, but that's really like the only like stuff. Like my wireless will like quit working, or I'll have forgotten to charge it or something. But I've been pretty good on stage. I fell once in Germany, but I like recovered pretty quickly, because there's like a step at the front of the stage, and I like put my foot down on it and just like fell over onto a bar, but I was able to hold myself up. So that wasn't that big of a deal. But yeah, I've come pretty close to, because I spin around a lot, so I've come pretty close to like falling through Cody's drums a couple times, which would be relatively catastrophic. But other than that, I've never had like a super big whoops-a-daisy on stage.
How about major transportation issues leaving you stranded?
Even that I've had very, very good luck with. Like, there's been times where I've been working for bands and we've needed to get something fixed, but the only like issues I've ever really had have been tires, which that's an easy fix. But we had our van broken into in Italy, so that was quite the interesting experience. And then on the tour in Europe before that one, we had this rental van that was just a hunk of garbage. And the door like didn't close all the way, and there was a bunk in it that was just made out of like the thinnest plywood ever, and it broke, and it was like spewing exhaust into the like van and everything like that. And so that was a bit of a nightmare. And then on this last tour, I almost got kidnapped, which was super interesting.
Gee, where did that happen at?
In Los Angeles. We were Cant Hill was filming a music video, so me and our tour manager, like, they had to load in for the video at like 8 a.m. So me and the TM stayed sleeping in the van, which we had running because it was 100 degrees in Los Angeles. And all the doors were locked, but this guy just like shimmied the lock and got into the driver's seat and was like putting his seatbelt on and was getting ready to drive away with the van when our TM woke up, and he was like, "Who are you?" And like kicked him out of the van, like started fighting with him essentially, and finally got him out of the van. The way that we have like our bunks set up in that van, it was like the first two benches, and then the back was like a top bunk and a bottom bunk. And so I sleep on the top bunk with my head towards the back window of the van, so I don't hear anything that goes on up front. And the only reason I woke up is because the van started shaking. By the time I turned around, our TM was already in the driver's seat, and he was like flipping someone off. and he's kind of an aggressive person, so I was like, are we getting like a parking ticket? And he was like pissed about that, or I didn't know what was happening. And then he sent a text to the group chat that was like, we have to leave because someone broke in and tried to steal the van. And I was like, oh my God. Because if he had not been on the front bench, I would have been gone with that van. Because I would have just thought someone was getting in to move it, and I probably wouldn't have even woken up. Like, I would have been gone.
Man, I think that's the first time I've ever heard, like, I've definitely heard of people, like, trying to get into a van, but it's never been a situation where it's been like, yeah, we were literally laying down, and the dude is getting ready to, like, put it in drive and go.
He was putting his seatbelt on. He was going to be safe and everything. And honestly, I don't know what I would have done if I woke up and some stranger was driving the van.
Right,
Because everyone likes to paint the picture that they'd be super heroic and, like, punch the guy in the face or something and guide the van to safety, but I probably would have just waited till he stopped at a red light and bailed.
Right. How about the worst promoter or overall situation you've been in at a show? I know for a lot of people, it's usually, which one do I pick?
Yeah, like, I don't deal with it all that often, which I'm very grateful for, because I stopped tour managing because I hated it and stuff like that. But, like, we've had some places where we'll pull up and, like, there isn't a PA or something like that, like, and the promoters are always like, no, it's cool, man, like, don't worry about it, we're gonna blah, blah, blah. And I might get, I don't know, a nasty email for saying this or whatever, but I would say that the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles has just, like, the worst staff. And I think anyone that tours can relate to that. Because their staff is just super rude, and, like, there's a time where I was tour managing the Browning, and I kept telling them that they had to, this band, it had to be this band's last song. He's like, no, man, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, you're throwing me under the bus here. Like, there's a lot of promoters out there that just don't care. But I'm fortunate enough to say that I've had a lot of good experiences. But how about, you were there for this one. So how about the guy in Illinois that asked both our bands to play 90 minutes? Because he didn't book any locals or anything for the show. And he's like, yeah, just so you know, it's only 2 bands. And he's like, well, can you guys play like 70 to 90 minutes each? You guys had like a 25-minute set, and we had like a 40-minute set. So
that was in Braidwood at the Top Fuel Saloon.
Yeah, and it ended up being a fun show for like the 30 people that were there, but the day before was just so stressful.
Oh yeah, because we were all like, it was a day off because we had played the 89th Street Collective, I think it was, in Oklahoma. Yeah, and then we had that day off, and Fire from the Gods had went back home. The funny thing about that show, after we got done playing, you remember how they had like that real small little like green room in the back?
Yeah,
and it wasn't even like a green room. It was like an entryway for the back door.
Yeah.
So I remember the sound guy there was a pretty decent guy.
Yeah.
You know, he was friendly. And my drummer, Kevin, after we got done playing, because usually at the end of tour, it's always like, sweet, let's get as cleaned up as possible. So it's like super easy when we get back to the house. You know, it's not like, oh, I got to do this. I got to clean up now. It's like, no, cool. Just go get home and just like sleep. You guys are getting ready to go on. And Kevin decides, I'm going to go get cleaned up. So he got completely naked.
Oh, that's amazing.
In that back room, and he's just kind of doing his thing. And the sound guy walks back there, and he goes, "Hey, don't mind me, it's just me."
What does that mean?
Right. And he's just like, okay. The sound guy goes, "Yeah, I just got to call the wife, let her know I'm going to be home a little earlier than I thought."
I was like, why did you need to tell me that? Like, that's amazing. I never heard that story.
So with you being a Midwest kid, such as myself, there's a conversation I wanted to have with you about the Midwest when it comes to music. There's certainly been no shortage of great bands from the region, and quite a few of them happen to come from your neck of the woods over in Chicago. I've had conversations with a few booking agents on the show, and also I've had firsthand experience with this. What's the deal with the Midwest?
I really don't know, man. It's super weird because I've seen some of the best shows ever here a long time ago. Like, we used to have a great metal scene with bands like, I mean, Oceano is from here, and like Veil of Maya is from here. And it used to be crazy. But I feel like kids here, a lot of kids, especially in like Illinois, are just like too cool. And like, I don't understand it, because like I said, like, you can go to the Northeast, sell out venues and stuff like that, and then you play in Chicago and it's just shot, like, or in Michigan and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think it has a lot to do with like kids just thinking that they're too cool. There's people that won't come to a show if like a certain style of band isn't playing, or they'll stand outside. And it's weird, man, because I feel like it's pretty secluded to this area. Like, because once you get outside it, like, Colorado's great. But as soon as you're back into Kansas or Missouri, it's like, kind of shot again. And then like as soon as you get to like Pittsburgh or New York on the other side, it's great again. But there's just like this hole of attitude, I feel like.
I don't think I've played a bad show in Ohio yet.
Yeah, Ohio's great.
I think they're one of the exceptions to the rule. And I don't think I've ever played a terrible show over in eastern Michigan, so like Detroit and that surrounding area. I always feel like that's been pretty solid. But outside of that, like, Indiana is real hit or miss.
Yes, that's the thing, is like, I can never predict how many people are going to be at a show. Like, even when I'm going to shows in Indiana and Illinois, I'm like, there's either going to be 300 people here or there's going to be 30 people here.
Right. Our last run that we did over the summer, we played at, what is that venue called? Northern Chicago. Way out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, are you talking about Penny Road Pub?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we played downstairs.
God, the stairs suck in that place.
Yeah, and for us, that was the very last day of tour. And you're talking, it was like a 6-week tour, 5-6 week tour. So everybody's just shot, and the door guy had an attitude with the package that was real great. And I remember specifically, we were getting our wristbands.
Nice.
Tour laminates are never enough. David Gantt from Filth.
Oh, yeah.
He was getting his wristband, and the guy was trying to put the wristband on him, and it wasn't working quite right. And he's like, "Oh, man, you got a bitch wrist."
What?
I can still see David's face to this day. It was just like completely dead.
I would never say that to David either, because he would eat me, I feel like.
The dude wasn't necessarily meaning it in a negative way. What he meant is that David's wrist was too big.
It's a bitch putting it on.
Yeah, but he said you have a bitch wrist. To make matters even worse, the sound guy there.
Oh God.
We're all set up. Thankfully, the air conditioning was alive and well in the basement there, so I couldn't complain about that. The sound guy thought it would be really cool to announce all the bands before they played.
Nice. Always a quality experience.
We realized that our two openers were like high school bands, and they were surprisingly good. I'm not shitting on them, but it was like a really harsh pay-to-play situation for them.
Yeah.
We're downstairs, we're completely shot. The sound guy is announcing bands, and someone from upstairs brought down a pizza.
Nice.
And you got like friends and family there. And I remember I was just like, are we at Chuck E. Cheese or what? And it's a shame, because I could definitely see that venue being great when it's like happening. Another venue over in your neck of the woods is Bada Brews.
Oh, yeah.
And the one time I've played there, it was a good experience.
I played there with you, didn't I?
Yeah.
I think the Cambian played that show, yeah.
Yep, that was the second time I had met you, and you guys were playing the B stage.
Yeah, the fucking floor.
Yeah. And don't even get me started about those festival-style shows.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, like I love him to death, and he has like turned me into the person that I am as far as touring and music goes. And I was in a Korn cover band with him for a long time, but like Ed he used to be notorious for doing shows like that, like just like 30 bands, and it starts at 2 p.m. and
10-minute changeovers if you're lucky.
Yeah, man, I love it. And now he works very hard on Big Shots in Valparaiso, and he's doing a great job with it. But yeah, it was just one of those, like, all right, we got 2 stages, and by that we mean we got a floor and a stage.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the absurdity of the Midwest, I suppose.
Yes, I mean, hit or miss is the best way to put it.
So before we wrap this up, I'm curious what kind of advice you'd have to say for a few groups of people. For starters, what advice would you give to local bands? Not necessarily local to your area, but just in general.
One of my biggest things would be don't, great as it is to have them on shows like when I'm on tour, like don't break your back selling tickets for like touring bands, because it doesn't do much for your band to open like those shows, because even, you might gain a couple fans, and I've done a bunch of very fun shows like that, and by all means, if you want to just do it and have fun, like do it, but don't break your back to sell these tickets, to pay these touring bands guarantees to play in front of no one. Like you're better off building a fan base, like just playing all local shows, or doing like with regional bands and stuff like that. And then my other piece of advice would be to have fun with it, like, because those were really like the most fun that I've ever had, was playing local shows and stuff like that. Like have fun and don't take it too seriously. There's a time where it calls for taking stuff seriously, and there's a time where it calls to just go play a show with your friends and have fun. But yeah, just having a good attitude is another thing. Like a lot of bands can be cocky and stuff like that because they have all their friends' support or something. But just like have a good attitude about it, and always network. Like meet the people that you're playing with, and so you can potentially play shows with them later and stuff like that. Yeah, and then quality recordings are a huge thing, because there's no excuse now to have any sort of bad quality recordings, because you can pay someone $100 to mix and master your song and have it sound like a $50,000 studio trip. So
what advice would you give to promoters?
Definitely there needs to be more of the sort of the old-fashioned way of promoting, or at least it needs to, like, shows need to get talked about more, because a lot of days now it's just like, well, I'm going to put the event page on Facebook and maybe I'll boost the post or something like that, and that's sort of how they expect to garner their people. But I would say like posters and flyers and stuff like that, and then doing their best to work with bands. And it's hard to explain because I've never promoted a show, like I've never put on a show, and I know that bands can come through and be like complete assholes and stuff like that. So it's probably very hard to work with some of them. But just like trying to accommodate what they need, especially if they've been on tour for a long time, like, having like chips and guacamole backstage is sometimes super nice when you like get out of a 12-hour drive or something. And just like the simple things, like not taking, because there's some venues where you're like, hey, could I get a bottle of water? And they're like, well, that's going to be $3 out of your catering budget, or blah, blah, blah. Like, which I get, because they need to save and make their money too. But yeah, just really working with bands and providing like a space that they want to come back to and that they enjoy being in. Because it really is, it's your house for a day. Like, it's where you live for a day, so.
And lastly, what advice would you give to bands hitting the road for the first time?
Again, another big thing would be to just have fun and enjoy yourself. Save money where you can, because it's super easy to start spending it once you start. Be very mindful of the people around you and the bands around you, and just and then just your fans. If you're at a point where you have a fan base, try and understand that, like, even if you might have, like, a fan that talks too much or whatever, that, like, they're very excited to be meeting you, or they're very excited to be listening to your music or something like that. And not being, like, too overly pushy with, like, merch and stuff like that. Because I know there's bands that get upset. They're like, people come up to the table and they want to talk and blah, 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 but they don't want to buy anything. And it's like, I love to create a space where both bands and fans feel comfortable, and like, just because you want to look at merch doesn't mean you have to buy anything, or like, have fun and be very respectful of the people around you and be safe. Like, don't drive tired, because it's better to miss a show than to die in a fiery accident. So don't drive tired. Drink a lot of water. Drink a ton of water, because it's very easy to get dehydrated. And yeah, I mean, having fun is my biggest thing, because in the end, that's what music is supposed to be about. You're supposed to be playing it because you like doing it.
Anything that you'd like to plug?
Browning is working on a new album right now that'll be out next year through Spine Farm Records. I just spent a long time working for Cant Hill, and they will have an album out next year through Rise Records. Huge thanks to Ormsby Guitars for the ridiculous amount of support that they've given me, despite my huge lack of the ability to play the guitar. My parents are sick. Thanks to my dad for picking me up from the airport every time I need to get picked up, and being super supportive. And yeah, I mean, thanks to you for having me, and thanks to anyone who has, given my band or me as an employee the time of day. And yeah, that's about it, I think.
Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Good luck with you moving on through next year with all your projects, and hopefully we'll cross paths again soon.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a ton of fun.
That concludes this episode. I'd like to thank Brian for being on the show. Check out the Browning and the Cambian's discographies. Also be sure to check out any of the other bands mentioned on the episode. Make sure you're following the show on social media, subscribe in your podcast app, and if you enjoy what you hear, head on over to Patreon and show your support. I've been Noah Sias, and as always, thank you for listening.